Okay.
Yes.
Again, thank you, everybody who has joined, registered, and joined. Some of our friends registered, but final minutes regrets because there are many other things that they need to attend. But now, at this time, 69 from 120 something that already registered log in. Hopefully that as the time goes, more people to join in later on. Again, my name is Togar Sitanggang. This discussion is called Let's Talk About Palm Oil. What it's talk about, anything about palm oil, from like today we are talking about biodiversity, maybe we're talking about labor issues, maybe we talk about trade, maybe we talk about prices, and on and on and on, everything that related to palm oil that is being discussed here. Who can be the speaker? Anybody also, anybody that would like to present their thought, their papers are welcome. I'm open to that. The session is usually in Bahasa Indonesia. The session was from the offline meeting at the restaurant at cafe in Jakarta. But since the pandemic, we are moving into the online session. It was a trial at first, but then become a weekly session. And today is, I think, the first. Today is the first full English session. And I'm hoping that to conduct this session for English International Session monthly. So the next one will be August, early August on Thursday, but the timing will not be about now, 15:30 Jakarta time, but maybe push back to be later so that our friends in Central America or US can join in. So maybe 8 o'clock in the morning their time. So 8 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening, in Jakarta time. Hopefully that will be, can accommodate everybody around the world can join and have a comfortable time to sit and in front of computer and having the discussion. And today, the format that we have is actually very simple. A 15-20 minute presentation by the speaker. And after that is all full discussion, 1.5 hours. So sometimes in some session we are reaching 1.5 hour plus, because everybody still want to say anything that they want to say, and become a bit debate, become a bit exchange of information, and that is the purpose of this discussion. Need to hear anybody's thought, everybody's thought about palm oil issues. So again, and thank you for everybody who's joining in today. This is the first online English session that we have. Hopefully will not be the last once again. Next month, I may ask maybe Pietro that will be presenting his paper on Europe, or maybe, I don't know, maybe France. I can ask Franz Claassen, also to present here. So this is good to share views, for what things that happen in palm oil industry. I think that is a very short one, and hopefully this as a start introduction for myself. Yes, well, I see my nephew joining in. Bu Francisca Simanjuntak Geneva, Joan Lumban Raja is my nephew. So she's in Bern, Indonesia Embassy Bern. And you can start now, Michelle, the presentation. You have about 15-minute presentation. Then will be followed by a long hour of discussion. Thank you.
So my name is Michelle Desilets. I am the Executive Director of Orangutan Land Trust. And it's really hard for me to talk and click at the same time behind the scenes, but bear with me. I've been working in orangutan conservation for 26 years now, and started looking at the palm oil issue in earnest about 15 years ago. Just make me feel rather old right now. Right, are you seeing a presentation now?
Yeah. It's all good? Wait, from the beginning, I think.
Yeah. Trying to go back to the beginning now. Oh, this is frustrating. I'm so sorry. I'm so technologically. Okay.
This first slide.
So obviously this is a few months old, this presentation. But what I'm here to talk about, and maybe introduce some talking points. We have some very esteemed colleagues in the Zoom room who I'm hoping will help elaborate, is the situation with palm oil. My interest, of course, long been a symbol of palm oil, and we're working at all what can be right with sustainable palm oil. As I mentioned, is everyone hearing me all right? Because I'm getting notices on my screen.
A little bit, but now it's all right.
Okay.
Michelle, I think you should reduce your bandwidth with putting off the video.
Sorry, how do I do this?
You stop the video so that the bandwidth is.
I see. Stop video. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned, I started working in orangutan conservation about 26 years ago, and around 2000, I helped to develop a center for orangutans, and design 100 orangutans. But by 2004, we had 100 orangutans.
Beg your pardon, I cannot hear you.
Okay. I don't know what to do. Can you hear now?
Now it's yes.
Okay. Sorry, I live out in the sticks, so maybe my bandwidth is not so good. Deary me. Okay. So the center that we built for 100 orangutans was soon inundated with several hundred orangutans, and they were coming from the emerging oil palm estates developing in Central Kalimantan. And it soon became clear to me that this was an issue that need some serious looking into and trying to figure out where solutions may lie, because we couldn't possibly pick up all of the orangutans that were being displaced and harmed in the emerging estates. And of course, in those times, there were no sustainability standards, and the orangutans pushed ever smaller forest and growing hungry some damage and considered agricultural pests that needed to be eradicated. So my interest in sustainable palm come a case of passion and empathy for the species that and that's where my talk is coming from today. So I think the first thing that we can agree, and I'm trying to go to the next slide, and will it go to the next slide? Is it going to the next slide on other people's? There we go.
And
The reality
Michelle,
on the ground.
Michelle, sorry,
Yeah.
can you a bit slow down on talking maybe?
Oh, okay. I'm always conscious of fitting in time. Okay, I will slow down. We all must acknowledge and own the reality on the ground, and that is that palm oil has been utterly devastating for landscapes, for the forest, for biodiversity, and for the orangutan. And of course, the orangutan gets so much attention, not only because they're such a charismatic and beautiful species, but because they have been very hard done by the palm oil industry and their starvation, displacement, and abuse at the hands of plantation workers over time, over the past couple of decades, has really gathered the attention of media, of NGOs, of consumers, and the general public. That's not to say that there's diversity impacts on other species are not also quite found. As supply chain members, as interested stakeholders, I think we all need to be aware that this is a reality of conventional established. We must work to remediate, to recover, and make right. And my computer is very slow. So the work that we do at Orangutan Land Trust and in the various platforms that we're engaged with really is based on good research, good science, research from, for example, Borneo Futures and from the IUCN. We know, for example, from such research that most orangutans live outside of protected areas. That means that they're in these landscapes where oil palm is present. And indeed, the research shows that in Borneo alone, 10,000 orangutans live in areas allocated for industrial palm. So it's quite clear that the idea of just picking up orangutans and moving them to another place or putting them in sanctuaries at those numbers, at that scale, is not feasible, nor is it good conservation practice. The IUCN has also demonstrated, however, that if we somehow try to turn away from palm oil, that we would simply be shifting the problem elsewhere, because other crops would need greater amounts of land due to their low yield. And if planted in the tropics, then that could be especially devastating for the high biodiversity that we see in the tropics. Now, there has been what I call, not kindly, fake science out there, or misperceptions, or yeah, it's hard to understand what the motive might be. For example, there's an Italian scientist, I guess he would call himself, called Roberto Gatti, who put out a report, and this is one of the slides that's missing from this presentation. He put out a report saying that sustainable palm oil does more damage and causes more deforestation than unsustainable. And, that doesn't make sense at all. How we come to these conclusions? If you look at this methodology, it's very flawed. And in fact, he reports a figure of deforestation in a POIG verified concession in Borneo during a time in which, in fact, there were no POIG verified concessions in Borneo. So you have to question his findings on that. And then we see headlines in the paper from NGOs who say the orangutan will be extinct in 10 years. Well, no orangutan conservationists would say that they're going to be extinct in 10 years. They're certainly being diminished at a great rate due to deforestation as well as hunting and other pressures. But as soon as you start putting these hyperbolic doomsday scenarios the conversation stops on how to reach solutions. So we are interested today in our talk about what the solutions are for protecting biodiversity in oil palm landscapes. And like I said, we believe that those solutions should be based on reliable and justifiable research and science from approved and known entities, such as those on your screen right now. I'm hoping people can still hear me because I'm getting all kinds of messages. And again, mine is slow to go to the next page. Yes, we can give you the IUCN report. It's called Palm Oil and Biodiversity, Borneo Futures. If you contact me, I can give you the links to the various reports that Borneo Futures have put out, or of course you can go to their website. And I don't know about your screen. I imagine it's the same as my screen, and it's not going to the next page.
Next page. Solution?
Yes, Francisca Gatti is the one who is off-cited on Twitter as the science to debunk the idea that we should be pursuing sustainable palm oil. You won't find any other scientific reports that come to that conclusion. So, of course, as we're talking about Twitter, people have seen these horrible images of orangutans fighting off diggers who are destroying their home for oil palm, and dead orangutans and shot orangutans and butchered orangutans and tigers and elephants and all kinds of wildlife being affected. They hear about human rights abuses in the industry, and they say, well, that's it. I want nothing to do with that. And the way we can stop all of these problems is simply boycott the product. Like most conservation organizations and NGOs in general who work in this issue, who have seen the problems associated with palm oil, we do not believe that a boycott is any solution whatsoever. In fact, we believe that a boycott is impractical due to the many names that palm oil can come under and the ubiquity of the ingredient in so many household products and food products. We think it's inhumane because of the millions of people whose livelihoods depend upon the palm oil industry. We think it's ineffective because even all of the noise that we hear about people boycotting, it's not really changed anything on the ground. It's no one said, oh, well, everyone's boycotting my palm oil, so I'll just plant some forest. It doesn't work that way. And finally, as the scientific community will point out, if we really did somehow ban the production of palm oil or drove the palm oil industry to its knees by a consumer boycott, there would be other crops that would be needed to fill the demand for oils. And those other crops have very low yields compared to palm oil. Okay, maybe you plant those crops in temperate regions where there's not orangutans and the biodiversity that you see in a rainforest. However, that does not, there's not enough land, agricultural land, to fill the need for oilseed by these temperate crops for the global consumption. And what will places in like Indonesia and Malaysia plant instead? They'll probably plant another oilseed crop with a lower yield, thereby putting more pressure on forest and orangutans and biodiversity. So we do not support, categorically do not support a blanket boycott of palm oil. Certainly it's a person's personal choice, but we do not see it as a solution for driving the change on the ground that we hope to see. So we're not alone in that feeling that a boycott is no solution. Coming up on the screen should be soon the many organizations, just a few of the organizations actually, that agree with us that such a solution is no solution. And again, it's telling me that I have a low system resource and that the pages aren't moving. So I don't know what to do.
So, okay, which slide that you want to talk about?
I would like the slide that shows the organizations. It's like an animation on this slide that say no, or even just go to the next slide.
This one? Is this one?
I think what you guys are seeing is different than what I'm seeing, because I think my device is slow. So can you tell me what you're seeing, and then I will talk about it?
The solution, the name of the organizations.
Okay, so there's the names of the
Zeus,
organizations.
all the
So that's
Zeus.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe if you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And if I don't see it on my screen, then maybe you
Sustainable
can
palm oil, PNC, RSPO.
Okay, thank you. So we look to the RSPO as that which defines sustainable palm oil for us today. In the broadest sense, that means no deforestation, no conversion of peat, and no exploitation. Of course, the first two are closely related to the protection of biodiversity. And because the RSPO is so broad in its membership, it's a global standard, it's recognized by marketplaces as generally a reliable standard. It's no silver bullet solution. Certification in itself is not going to change everything. And it has, it's not perfect. There are no perfect solutions in such a complicated issue. And the beauty of the system is that the power of change is in its membership, and the power of change is in the shared responsibility of its membership. And when there is an issue, say on assurance, or maybe some rogue players that are bringing down the reputation of RSPO by not being compliant, there are systems in place. There are complaints panels and investigation monitoring units. There's working groups and task forces put together to address these issues. Believe it or not, my screen just came up with the previous slides. So if we can move, let me try to move to the next slide, see if it works, but if not, maybe.
No, just tell us next. I mean, say it next, so we can.
Yeah, next then.
Yeah. Next. The Pongo Alliance.
Pardon?
Pongo
Alliance. Okay, yeah. I think before I start to talk about Pongo Alliance, there's a missing slide from this presentation in which I wanted to touch upon briefly, and this might be an interesting talking point for the attendees here, is the role of ISPO and MSPO, and also POIG, Palm Oil Innovation Group, versus RSPO. Where do these all fit together? Can they complement one another? To clarify for those that are not aware, ISPO, Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil, and MSPO, Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil, are the standards which are government set standards and mandatory for growers in those nations. And the RSPO is a voluntary standard. It can be said that while they are not completely aligned, they're not carbon copies one another as far as the criteria and the indicators, that through the mandatory standards, we are raising the floor. We're saying that the bare minimum of what we should see in sustainable palm oil is as defined by these organizations, these platforms. And the RSPO rather raises the ceiling. I would like to see a little bit more alignment and raise that floor a bit more. And I encourage the continued collaboration between RSPO and the national initiatives to demonstrate that all palm oil coming from these producing nations, Indonesia and Malaysia being the largest producing nations of palm oil, at least can be free of deforestation, free of peak conversion, and free of human exploitation at its bare minimum. And POEG, where does POEG now stand? Now that the RSPO P&C has, in 2018, delivered what the market and the NGOs had been demanding as far as NDPE, that the POEG is now all about using innovation to implement these standards and really deliver the impacts that we'd like to see. So I'd like to also mention, now that we're on the slide of Pongo Alliance, another initiative that is critical for really seeing what can be done, not only to prevent the loss to biodiversity in oil palm landscapes, but in fact to enhance it, to enable it, to make it possible for biodiversity to actually thrive. And this is about companies going above and beyond those bare requirements of compliance with the RSPO standard. The Pongo Alliance is a platform which includes some of the largest palm oil growers in Southeast Asia, such as Simon Darby, Musi Mas, Golden Agri Resources, as well as the leading conservation scientists and NGOs working in these regions to develop projects that can demonstrate how to, for example, improve connectivity between forest fragments in these landscapes, to create corridors, to enhance the availability of food sources, fruiting trees for large mammals like the orangutan. And Dr. John Payne, I know, is on the call, and I will hope that he will have an opportunity to speak more in detail about how making resilient landscapes for wildlife and people can be an aspiration we should all look for. Another slide that is missing, which would come next if I had the right slideshow, was about shared responsibility. And this speaks to the audience that's here on this Zoom call now. Everybody has a responsibility for protecting biodiversity by choosing sustainable palm oil. And that starts, all along the value chain, from the growers, processors and traders, the retailers, the manufacturers, and indeed the consumers. By demanding and choosing sustainable palm oil, we can reward those players on the ground who are doing the right thing. We can then provide an incentive for other growers to also want to join in on the sustainability journey and really make a difference on the ground. But beyond that value chain, there's other players that we look towards for their support, and that includes the NGOs. NGOs, a number of them have been very effective in driving this transformation of this industry, both from within the platforms like RSPO and the more vocal and perhaps sometimes negative NGOs on the outside that call attention to the faults in the system and the failures along the way. I think we need to recognize those sources of information as essential in guiding our journey. Financial institutions, I hope there's some representatives of financial institutions on this call, and perhaps they can chat a little bit about what role financial institutions can play in supporting the transformation to sustainable palm oil. And a real emphasis people are talking about right now is the governments of both the producing nations as well as the consuming nations. We see in Europe, I'm working with the Sustainable Palm Oil Choice Platform, which is part of the European Palm Oil Association. And in Europe, we're working to achieve 100% CSPO in 2020. And that is requiring the support of the nations of the EU, as many nations have indeed signed up to the Amsterdam Declaration for Forest about removing deforestation from supply chains. And we look to the governments in the large consuming nations of India and China to also make those commitments. So if we can go to the last slide, and in fact, that should be the thank you slide, and the orangutan and her infants. Thank you for choosing sustainable palm oil and being part of the solution. And I look forward to the ensuing discussions.